and welcome to my channel, Joyce's Affordable Glam Life 360, or just Joyce. I'm on here today. It's Unsolved Mystery Thursday, and this mystery is called the Moorgate Train Crash. So if you would like to see how I achieve this look, plus what the mystery is all about, then keep on watching. On February 28th, 1975, at 8:38 a.m., Northern Line Underground train left half a minute late from Drayton Park, carrying 300 passengers to Moorgate on the Highbury branch. The train approached its destination at 8:46 a.m., failing to slow down at the recommended speed of 15 miles per hour. Instead, it continued to travel at 30 to 40 miles an hour. Some witnesses have even stated that they believe the train was accelerating as it reached the platform. London Underground had measures put into place if an occurrence such as this was to take place. A device that was called sand drag would prevent any carriages that might be out of control from automatically divert them into a siding or less dangerous track. This system was to be effective against any unauthorized vehicles that could potentially threaten scheduled services. Train 272 plowed on through this design and collided with buffers before striking the solid concrete wall beyond. Initially, the first responders on the scene thought that a four-car train overshot the platform. All it needed was to be put back into position. When they worked their way along the tunnel, when they started to work their way through the tunnel is when they declared an emergency. Really quickly, I am using on my eyes today the Maybelline Nudes palette. It's one of their newer palettes. Nudes of New York, it's called. The force of the impact crushed the first 2.5 cars of the train into half their proper lengths. The first car had wedged itself into the roof of the tunnel. The second car had lodged beneath the first, while the third had traveled over the second and collided with the first into a mangled mess. It took almost a week to complete the rescue operation. It consisted of 1,600 emergency personnel. 16 doctors joined the firemen, police, and ambulance crews, as well as scores of volunteers and helpers. It took 13 hours after the crash to remove the last of the 74 injured passengers from the scene. Leslie Newson, who was the driver of the train, was the last of the fatalities to be removed from the scene. The Highbury branch was itself an anomaly. It was built to accommodate main line trains and to connect to the rail network at Finsbury Park. In 1975, it was a shuttle of 2 miles from Moorgate to Drayton Park and was served by smaller-sized tube stock. In the crash, the small train cars had space in the large tunnel to ride under and over each other, possibly causing greater damage than would have occurred in a smaller tunnel. The heat rose to over 49 degrees Celsius, which would be 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and oxygen levels dropped to 16%. To imagine what the conditions were like for the emergency services and the rescuers from the London Fire Brigade is quite frankly unimaginable. I don't think that anyone could imagine what that is like. The last body from the wreckage was not removed until March 4th. So the last body that I said was removed was Leslie Newson, who was the driver of the train. Crews worked nonstop in the dark, dusty tunnel, which was illuminated by old-style box lamps, to rescue the trapped people. In order to fit through some of the gaps in the carriages and to avoid heat exhaustion, firefighters removed their helmet, tunic, belts, and axes. This crash is considered the worst peacetime accident on the London Underground. Engineers were able to establish through various tests beyond a reasonable doubt that the accident had not been caused by mechanical fault. When tested, all the train's vital components and systems were working as intended. Any faulty components were direct results of the impact and not the cause of it. According to 2 rail workers who were on the platform when train 272 arrived, they saw the driver Newson sitting in the driver's seat, and they say he appeared calm and sat upright as he looked directly ahead. It was as though he was unaware that he was passing through a scheduled stop when the train collided with the barrier. Investigators said that Newson maintained his muscle tone and balance throughout the approach. There were no signs of cardiac problems nor of a condition such as epilepsy when Newson's body was examined. And so this is where the mystery begins, because ruling out mechanical fault leaves driver error as the almost certain cause. And explaining the error is not straightforward. What was Leslie Newson's state of mind? He was a cautious train driver, and he had withdrawn some money to give to his daughter that morning to buy a new car. He did not drink very much, and there was no evidence on the morning of the accident of his having drunk alcohol, even though by the time his body was recovered, it had decomposed enough for alcohol to be present in his blood. He'd driven this train for several rounds of the Moorgate Train run that very morning without incident or mishap. However, he did miss lots of cues that should have alerted him to imminent disaster. For example, the sharp set of scissor points into the station should have alerted him to imminent danger. His hand was on the power handle at least until 2 seconds before the crash. He did not even put his hands up to protect his face as the train hurtled into the blind tunnel. The train hit a pretty significant bump when it went through the station at normal speed. Some passengers were thrown from their chairs, and some standing passengers fell down when they hit this bump. It is hard to believe that this would not have jolted him out of his reverie. Some have suggested that there is a possibility that he suffered from a type of seizure known as transient global amnesia or dissociative fugue. He might have been frozen. In position and been unable to move, or even unaware of where he was. These types of events are very rare, and Newson had no history of seizures. Suicide was another theory that was ruled out. Newson was a reliable worker with no history of suicide. He was happily married with family. He had about $500 in his pocket that he planned on buying a used car for his daughter after he was done working. He had no reason to commit suicide and no indication that he was suicidal. The witnesses on the platform did say that the driver appeared to be remaining straight up and staring forward even after the bump, which leads back to suicide. An author whose father died in the crash and subsequently spent a year investigating it thinks the crash was deliberate and pre-planned. Apparently, the driver Newsom overran a platform on at least one other occasion. If someone was going to commit suicide, would they have taken so many innocent people with them unless there was another agenda? 42 passengers were killed, 74 passengers were injured and needed further treatment at the hospital. So a little more information on the morning of the crash. The driver arrived, so Newson arrived at work at about 6:10 a.m. Before he arrived at work, he made himself a cup of tea. He didn't very often eat breakfast in the morning, but he always had a cup of tea. When he arrived at work, he had enough time to join his colleagues for another cup of tea before starting his shift at 6:24 a.m. He shared some milk from his flask. So he shared some milk from his flask with one colleague. When another colleague asked for some sugar, Newson told him, go easy with it. I shall want another cup when I come off duty. So his colleagues didn't know him very well, but what they did know of him, they said he seemed to be conscientious and cheerful. He had been employed at London Transport since 1969, but he had transferred to Drayton Park not that long before the crash occurred. Almost 2 weeks before the crash, he had driven 121 times onto Platform 9, where the accident occurred without incident. Guard Bob Harris was assigned to Newson's train that morning. He was running late, so motorman Rosario volunteered to fill in until Harris arrived. Rosario did not know Newson, but found him to be fit and normal that morning, and the train ran as expected. Harris took over his duty just after 7 a.m. Harris was 18 and had been on the job since the previous August. He worked regularly with Newson since his transfer. Harris and Newson did not speak a great deal, but it could have been because of the gap in age. If I didn't mention it before, which I don't think I did, he was 56. So 1856, it's a pretty large age gap. As the train left on its fourth and final journey, Newson waved to a colleague on the platform at Drayton Park. Just after the train departed Old Street, Harris left his post at the leading double-door bay on his way back. He soon realized, though, that the train was approaching Moorgate too fast. As soon as he thought it, though, he was thrown to the floor. Standing on the platform 9, railman Andrews watched the train approaching and knew it could not stop in time. Oh, and what I put on my cheeks was the bronzer is the Physicians Formula bronzer, and the shade is called bronzer. And then for blush, I just picked these up not long ago. They're the LA Girl Blushed Babe blush palette, and it looks like this in these colors, and I used this color on my cheeks today. Rang for control from the adjacent platform, but unfortunately he was too late. Guard Fryer stood among the 20 to 30 people waiting on the platform. As he heard the train approaching too fast, he looked around to see Newson again sitting in what's been said before, sitting in a normal position in the cab. The train hit the sand pit and ran into the overrun tunnel. The only journalist allowed into the tunnel during the recovery operation described the scene as a horrible mess of limbs and mangled iron. In the inquest that followed Moorgate, everyone tried to understand the events that led up to the collision. X-rays that were taken of Newson's hands and forearms confirmed the eyewitness statements that Newson did not raise his hands before impact, even though it would have been a natural human instinct to protect your face. Newson had not been electrocuted. So the cause of his death was, and I quote, shock from multiple injuries, unquote. The medical examiner found no dissolved drug or poison matter and nothing to suggest a seizure or brain disease. There was also no indication of a heavy drinking habit. Another examiner concluded that the 80 milligrams per 100 milliliter of alcohol in Newson's blood indicated that he had been drinking on the morning of his death. This became the subject of much disagreement between the examiners. Some felt the level was high enough to make a person more susceptible to a lapse in concentration, while others did not. One examiner brought up that the level of alcohol might have been caused by the growth of microorganisms and fungi in a decomposing body, which may have made it more prevalent from the 4 days in a high temperature environment. The inquest deemed that the incident was accidental. Was Newson the kind of man who would have willfully taken so many lives in order to take his own? I mean, had he been drinking that morning? Would it have been enough for him to lose concentration to such an extent? And was he a victim to an unexplained medical condition? These are questions that will probably never be answered. As I said, the inquest that happened afterwards concluded that it was an accidental accident. So we probably will never know exactly what happened. This was a mystery of what happened to have this crash occur. There was no mechanical failure, and so it leads to believe that there was a driver failure of some sort, whether it was a medical condition, suicide. They say, you know, the driver wasn't suicidal or didn't seem upset or depressed. And I know from my own personal experience, sometimes you smile through the sadness or anxiety or depression or whatever you're going through. For me personally, I know that there'd be days where I'm smiling, but on the inside, I'm not doing so well. So I also don't feel that you can just rule out suicide for that matter. You know, they said that he was upright, he was holding on, and he didn't let go until basically the crash happened, where he probably had no choice but to let go. So maybe he was determined. Maybe there was something going on that we don't know about, which possibly could have happened. So in the end, what a sad story. In whatever way you look at it, for this crash to occur. You know, people get on a train, an airplane, or what have you, a bus, and believe they're going to get to their destination and go on with the day. And sometimes that doesn't happen. And it's just sad, no matter which way you look at it. And so I know that because of this occurrence, they've put in more security and ways of stopping a train before it does crash. So, you know, a positive that came out of that. If you liked this video and you like makeup and mystery, please hit the thumbs up. It helps me out. If you are not subscribed to my channel, would you please consider subscribing to my channel? If you already are subscribed to my channel, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your love and support, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.